Hello everybody. Today I'm going to be refuting Renee's claim that a United States justice system is biased against people of color. And I'm not making a counterclaim, so I'm not completely ignoring the possibility of racial discrimination occurring in the U.S. justice system. However, I do believe Renee's claim is simply a false generalization or assumption based on lack of sufficient evidence and data. So here's why. First, I would like to focus on her first subclaim. In this first subclaim, she uses a Huffington Post article and some statistics. So she begins with a statement from the Huffington Post article that states, white Americans are more likely than black Americans to have used most kinds of illegal drugs, including cocaine, marijuana, and LSD. Yet blacks are far more likely to go to prison for drug offenses. She backs this statement with one 2011 survey statistic. The statistic says that nearly 20% of whites, which is truly 17% when I went into the article, have used the cocaine compared to 10% of blacks and Latinos. The problem with this statistic is that she does not tell us the necessary details about the statistic, leaving it a mere questionable piece of evidence. With this statistic, the sample size is not specified. Although the percent of whites having used cocaine is higher than the percent of blacks and Latinos using it, it is possible that 20% of the whites can actually be more than the 10% of blacks and Latinos. So in other words, the statistic lacks to give us information on how it was gathered. We also must consider who the data is being gathered by. The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration is a government agency hoping to advance the health of this nation. Because of this, the sample might only consist of people who are recovering from the substance abuse, which means that the sample might not include all substance abusers, only the ones under this government agency. In this subclaim, Renee indirectly contradicts herself because of the lack of statistical data. She cannot prove the statement that white Americans are more likely than black Americans to have used most kinds of illegal drugs, including cocaine, marijuana, and LSD, because she only gives us data about the usage of cocaine. She does not show proof for white Americans using marijuana or LSD more frequently than people of color. This gives us no reason to believe the statement in its entirety. Also, in the same Huffington Post article, I found that it says that crack is actually more popular among blacks and whites, which completely diminishes her claim about drug usage by blacks and whites. I now want to turn to a second piece of evidence in this subclaim, which is the Mississippi example. She begins by stating our Fourth Amendment and then continues to state an example which is in violation of this amendment. The example is that the black community of Madison County are under permanent siege by the policing program. She states some facts. So Madison County is 58% white and 38% black. Madison crime rate is 64% lower than the national average. She then concludes that the only reason for this constant siege is discrimination on people of color. So although this is a possible result, there's not enough data to prove her conclusion without doubt. It is also a possibility that the crime rate in Madison County is lower due to the policing programs that are put into effect, and if Madison were to go with without these policing programs, the crime rate would increase. So even if we consider this example to be valid, it is almost impossible to make a claim based solely on this instance. So that's why I would say that this is a hasty generalization. We must consider exceptions when dealing with generalizations. So maybe this is an exception in the U.S. justice system because Mississippi is much more segregated than the rest of the country. It is possible that this example does not reflect on the rest of the country. If the claim was about the justice system in Mississippi or even in Madison, this example would be much more sufficient. But because we are talking about the U.S. justice system, we need more than just this case. Turning to our second subclaim is the Brock Turner and Corey Beatty example. And this is the case where Turner and Beatty received two different sentences for the same offense. She claims that the only difference between these cases was that Turner is black and Turner is white and Beatty's black. She's ignoring many other significant influences on the sentences given. They were cases dealt by different judges in different states, and in the different states there are different laws. And so this is only one part of the many influences that determine the time of the sentences. Another ignored influence is the different pieces of evidence in each case. So in Beatty's case, there was a video evidence to prove that he was guilty. And in Turner's case, there was not. So video evidence is a crucial part in convicting the suspects and in turn influencing the sentences given. Also, Beatty was convicted along with 3 fellow students. One of those 3 was a white male. Still, they all received the same sentence. This is another key part of the convictions of the Beatty case that is certain to diminish her claim. Once again, Renee's reasoning fails to prove her claim that the United States justice system is biased toward people of color because of the lack of substantial statistical data and false generalizations being made in the first subclaim, and the ignorance to other influences in the second. Thank you.
All right, the response on the first point is largely a series of presses on the research that's been done here and the statistical information, and I'm not sure that that accomplishes much for your argument. I think there's a better argument to be made about the reasoning process using those statistics than arguing the statistics themselves. I mean, you've got some reservations about the kind of research that's being done, the sample size, the organization that's collecting the information, and none of that is, by the way, documented. There's no evidence that suggests there's a problem with the study. These are just like random questions that you're raising about the issue, and it's okay to make those kinds of presses, but they don't necessarily build a very strong argument. The argument about the use of the drugs, you do have one piece of information. I do think you need a little bit more, you say you have got a piece of information. I didn't hear a source citation on it. Maybe it was in the original, and that just gets repeated here, that crack is more popular among the black community, and that's really the thing that accounts for the difference. Why is that a valid difference? Why is that an important difference? Why is it that the rules are different applying to crack than to other kinds of drugs? Is it designed to address people of color specifically, or is it because the drug is perceived as being a different kind of threat? I think that's where that argument needs to develop a little bit. I think that's probably the stronger argument on that point than the little presses that you have on the earlier argument. The issue about the Mississippi example, I do think that you have a nice valid criticism about maybe the reason the crime rate is the way it is there, 64% lower than the national average, is because the way the police are doing their policing in this particular situation. I don't remember that there was specific evidence that talked about how the black community in that area is being treated or harmed. That doesn't mean that there wasn't evidence. I just don't remember what the evidence was, and that doesn't seem to be discussed by you in this argument, but you do raise the valid question about which is the cause and which is the effect in this particular situation. I also think you've got a good point here about it being a hasty generalization. You suggest that maybe Mississippi is not the place that we should use to generalize about the whole country's law enforcement techniques, and I think that that's a valid criticism. It would be helpful if you could show why Mississippi is an outlier, either because of poverty or the crime rates or the diversity of the population or the lack of diversity of the population, something that shows that it's really not really a sound way to make the generalization generalization. The second point is the one where you had more specific information. You do suggest that there are differences between the two cases, the presence of video evidence, the presence of other people who were convicted of the crime, including a white accused who was sentenced the same way that the black accused were, which seems to undermine the notion that there is a different, that there's an illegitimate difference here based on race. It's much more likely that it does in fact reflect the differences in what the state rules are and how the judges perceive the issues in this particular situation as opposed to it being based on color. I think that was a good piece of information. I do think, though, that you need to give us sources for that information, and we're not getting that. All right, let's stop there. Thank you.